Welcome to Lens of Leadership, our Ted Lasso rewatch podcast. Before we dive into this episode's leadership lessons, let's watch a quick recap.
Season 2, Episode 1 starts off with a scowl as Nate frets over the possibility of yet another AFC Richmond tie. Dani Rojas takes a penalty kick, killing Earl the Greyhound mascot. Ted tells the press that something exists to make you cry and also help you get from one place to a better one. Nate is rude to Will more than once. Rebecca and Keely have some girl talk. Roy racks up quite a few quid that he owes Phoebe for cussing about Keely wanting him to be a pundit. Dani has the yips. Higgins suggests a sports therapist. Ted is skeptical but agrees, sort of. Roy and Keely double date with Rebecca. Roy insists that Rebecca shouldn't settle for fine. Dr. Sharon talks about the yips, says they can be cured with discipline, not denial. Higgins juggles offices. Dani is cured. Football is life. The episode ends as Roy enjoys yoga night and watched Jamie Tart on reality TV.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Caniglio.
And I'm Marnie Stockman. And this is Lens of Leadership, a Ted Lasso rewatch podcast. We're the authors of Lead It Like Lasso, a leadership book for life, your life.
This podcast is an extension of many of the elements outlined in our book. We invite you to join us as we take a deep dive into each episode and explore the leadership principles as they play out in the series. And for today's episode, we're diving into Season 2, Episode 1, Goodbye, Earl. We're excited to jump into a number of different topics with our special guests, Garth Nichols and Jason Rogers.
Yay! We are so excited. One of the best things about the Ted Lasso community are the people, and we're fortunate enough to have connected with Jason and Garth. They are truly our people. They have a podcast called Lassoing Leadership.
And as listeners of that podcast, I'm here to tell you it's fantastic. We encourage everyone to check it out, especially if you're like us and share a love for everything leadership. So let's welcome both Garth and Jason to the show.
Jason and Garth, thanks for taking the time to join us. We'd love for you to introduce yourselves. So if you guys will take it away from here.
Yeah, sure thing. My name is
Garth. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going first.
Yeah.
That's why there are people.
This is an ongoing joke. Jason always gets me to go first, so I thought this was going to be seamless, but here we go. So my name is Garth Nichols, and I am in Toronto, Ontario, which is the sacred lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and governed by Treaty 13. I'm vice principal at Havergal College, and my areas of expertise and portfolio is experiential education and innovation. And I first connected with Jason through independent school professional development, and he was running a module, and he used some Ted Lassoisms in it. And I was like, buddy, this is going to be so fun. We're going to do a podcast. And then I didn't hear from him for a long time, a long time. I pestered him, I bothered him, and now we have a podcast. So Jason, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Garth. I'm Jason Rogers. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I'm the head of school at an independent school called Rundle College. Rundle has about 1,300 students, and we have 3 distinct programs. One of them is for kids with learning disabilities, and the other is a more traditional university preparatory type school. And come to this podcast, yes, through a course called Leadership and Faculty Culture that's delivered to independent school educators and leaders from across Canada. And that's how Garth and I met. And now we're about 60 episodes into our own podcast, and we're thrilled to be on the other end of the mic today. Thanks for having us.
It's a whole different ball game, right? At the other side.
Oh, yeah.
It's great to be chatting with you two again. It's going to be a lot of fun.
So Jason, why did you ghost Garth? What took you so long to get back to him?
I think because I have a full-time job. I think Garth gets paid full-time, works part-time. And it's just reasonable to get back to somebody a week later. But, there's 7 emails that came in that time. So that's what he means by ghosting.
Well, let me just say that, Garth, you are definitely then my people. I one time broke my phone, and as I took it in to get fixed, so I broke it in the parking lot of the phone store. But on the way in with broken shards of glass, I had to text 4 people, including Nick, and say, I'm okay. Well, my phone is going to be down for 90 minutes. So please do not call the resident hospital police because I haven't responded. So I get you.
All right.
Appreciate that.
Let's dive into the episode. So I'm going to start with the opening scene of the episode, which is Dani Rojas standing over, he's about to take a penalty. And I don't know if you guys know this, but our audience knows that Dani Rojas is like our favorite character. We just absolutely love Dani. And we all know that, he starts his run up to his penalty, talking to himself with his saying, football is life.
Football is life.
And we know what happens from there. Poor Earl. And of course, with the help of Dr. Sharon, we also know that football is also death, right? And as Dani would say, football is also football too, but mostly football is life. But in our book, we have the whole notion of leadership rules, and we stole that saying. We kind of tweaked it a little bit. And we have our number one rule, which is leadership is life and everyone is a leader. And I'm curious if that notion, either one of you guys, leadership is life, everyone is a leader, I think that resonates with you guys, but I'm curious what you guys think about that whole concept.
Yeah, it resonates deeply with me, and I love Dani as well, and I love this whole episode for all the magic that's in it. And for me, and I don't know, Garth, how you feel about this, but leadership is life because it's got to be lived authentically. In our leadership, we have to start with authentic leadership. We have to be who we are, and we've got to bring it that way. And I think that's one of the first most important things about leadership and life is being authentic. I think the second thing that really resonated with me when you all were saying that is the fact that, we can practice, but until we're living life or we're playing the game, we don't actually see, what's important. And so I think about this in terms of leadership. As a leader, if you choose to distribute leadership to other people, it has to be authentic and it's got to be lived. There's got to be, wins and losses. There's got to be consequences and gains. And if you don't allow others in your orbit or in your organization or in your circle to, live leadership that way, they're not actually leading. They're more likely to being managed or micromanaged in kind of a worst case scenario. So so I really think that, if we're going to live life or leadership is life, then I think we have to let other people lead authentically. And I think that's what comes to mind at first when we hear this from leadership is life.
That's awesome.
Jason, you're always so full of wisdom. This resonates with me because I love that what it does is it says leadership is not formal titles. Leadership is who you are and who you can be. I do think that everyone has leadership within them. Everyone's telling different stories about how they are leading. I came across a fantastic sort of understanding of leadership. You can lead from the front, which is usually what we celebrate and know as leadership, but you can also lead from behind, from beside, and in field. And I think the more that we can focus the story of leadership away from just formal titles, the more empowered people can feel, and the more we'll get the best out of everyone. And I think that's what Ted taught us, right?
Yeah.
We remarked over the course of our podcast that very rarely people said their favorite character was Ted, but he was always interwoven into why other people were, being their best selves, and all those good things. It was what he had set up. So leading from the front is not the only way to lead. And that's why leadership is life resonates with me.
Well,
That's
it's
awesome.
interesting because the saying is it's not what you say, it's how you make someone feel is what they remember. And so it's that's why Ted isn't everyone's favorite character. It is how he made us all feel watching it, right? Is what makes it memorable. So I could talk on 37 of those bullet points, but I won't because we did not get you to agree to the 37-hour podcast that we had requested. So, which is fair. There is dinner and such in the way, but a lot of that speaks to me. But it's interesting because Jason, you mentioned authenticity, and I want to talk about Nate. Because Nate at this episode seems to start taking a little downward turn himself. You start to see a little bit of command and control from Nate with the way he's behaving toward Will. His little snarky comment, oh, do we need to motivate Dani? We could just show him his paycheck. I thought, oh, okay, this is going somewhere with Nate, right? We see some how could How could Ted have caught this earlier? What could he have been paying attention to? What can leaders be on the lookout for so that they realize this is happening? Because we all saw it, but bless the writers and the producers that showed us the bits of Nate that let us see it. How would a real life leader see this coming?
I struggle with that too, because I wonder if you can always see it ahead of time. I think, first of all, by giving people good opportunities to lead from the field, as Garth had said earlier, you get to, get a sense of what kind of leader they're going to be and be able to coach them through those non-catastrophic failures. I think when you end up in a leadership role, an authentic leadership role, the opportunity for a little bit more catastrophic failure is absolutely available to you. So was there an opportunity enough to coach Nate, as he's rising in the coaching staff? Maybe not. It seemed like his ascent was pretty quick. So that was really the first thing that came to me. But I think the other thing Ted maybe doesn't do that well is he doesn't talk explicitly about leadership and leadership styles. He really leads by example. If you watch him carefully, you can pick up all the leadership you need to, but I don't see, him stepping out that far into leadership and actually explaining what he's doing to the people who are around him. And had he done some of that, then maybe they would have had a chance to have those kind of, important and difficult conversations about a leadership construct that Nate may be holding in his head. It's a bias he has, which is probably rooted in many things, which is, largely to start with his observations of leadership from his life. And so I just don't see Ted and Nate or Beard or Roy having those conversations. They're left to learn by watching Ted. So I'm not sure there's much else could have been done in this situation.
I disagree, Jason, and you and I talked about this a lot. They just constantly missed opportunities to pick up on some things that Nate says throughout the course of the season. I think in a lot of ways that when Ted elevated Nate from sort of towel boy to this position, I think in some ways he thought his mentorship was done. Like Nate should be grateful. Nate saw this as, wow, I've finally been recognized. There's a couple times where Nate volunteers for things and he gets shot down. Like, we need a big dog to do this work. And
he gets laughed at for that one.
And he gets laughed at and he gets teased. And humor is a part of Ted's leadership. But I do think that we have to be on the lookout for when people stop being curious. And I think Nate stopped being curious, and that's why he goes command and control, because he thought that he had that formal power and the authority to do these things. I also think that he lacked the ability to lead in any other way. And that is what he learns from Ted over the course of the season. I'd also say that leaders, when we realize this is happening, like, we have to go back to the Simon Sinek playbook here. I do think Nate lost his way with why he was a genius, why he loves soccer. And so as leaders, we start to pay attention to when people are complaining more than appreciating. They're complaining more than being curious. I think that is a ratio we need to keep in our heads as we talk to individuals. We live in complex organizations. I'm in education. Jason's in education. There's nothing more complex than trying to manage and lead human beings who bring so much to the table. So I would say that, and I would also say that there was nowhere else for Nate to go. He saw himself as a big dog, and I don't think that Ted was able to coach him or mentor him to a successful next step, either within the organization or beyond. And I think as leaders, we have to be really cognizant of who wants to grow more, who wants to grow outside of our leadership. And I'm sure that I know that Jason does this really well. Succession planning, building up others, so that when you get asked for, hey boss, I need a recommendation letter for you, I'm applying, your first response is, I'm so happy for you. Like, I wish you the best of luck. There is no gripe. There is no sort of misgivings about them leaving, all the time that you've spent nurturing them. I think we have to be really aware of those two things, like when they lose their why, and then making sure that they've got places to grow.
Hey, Garth, while you're going through that though, Garth, I wonder if, wisdom is not what's missing here, Nate. And you can't rapidly acquire wisdom in leadership, and he's so new that he is going to make these mistakes and pull from old paradigms and not understand the in situ, ramifications of the way that he's leading. And so maybe this is just a necessary part of his development. I think we see it in our own leadership and others' leadership. So I think he's developing wisdom through this, and Ted is definitely going to steward him through it in the days ahead.
Yeah,
And
like
it
who
is
hasn't
as
gone
well.
back to like old paradigms? Like who hasn't gone back to, tropes of leadership when they're struggling, for sure. Yeah, I agree, Jason.
It's just a little out of character for Ted, though. I mean, the signs were there, and he just chose not to address it at all with Nate until it just got way out of. So it's, as you mentioned earlier, Garth, it was paying attention, looking for it, which I think is critical for any leader to see when people are kind of going off the rails a little bit. But then it's not only understanding that it's going off and paying attention to it, but it's willing to do something about it. And I just found it an interesting storyline, because in almost every other scenario, it seems like Ted always does something about it. And this one, he chose to ignore, at least from the outside looking in. But anyway, great lesson. So let's move on a little bit. And in episode 1, we learned that Roy has retired, right, from the previous season. We all saw the writing on the wall based on his injuries, and it's clear he's having a hard time adjusting.
So once the season's over, you're gonna have more time to see some friends, right?
I see friends all the time.
I know. You've got your yoga mums. Don't you ever want anything more than sitting in child's pose, getting buzzed on rosé and gossiping about reality TV with a bunch of women that know nothing about you?
No, I love it.
And I think it's clear that his support network, specifically Ted and Keely, can see this as well, because Keely is trying to get Roy to sign up as a pundit, and Ted is desperately trying, probably some part for his own reasons, but for the benefit of Roy, to get him back to AFC Richmond. And this kind of reminds Martin and I, we work with a lot of young people, and I know you guys do as well. And they, a lot of them feel stuck, whether it's within their career or whether their relationship. It's really tough to get out of that mode of feeling stuck. And it feels like Roy is in that mode at this point. So we're curious, this is probably a pretty hard question if you haven't thought about it, but have either of you been in a place where you've been stuck? And how do you know, and how do you work to get out of it? And I ask because I think we're always curious on different strategies and ways to get past this, because it really, I think a lot of people really, feel, familiar in the position of being stuck.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one. I think back to about 28 or 30 years ago when I was becoming a teacher, and I remember knowing this guy's name was Joe, and he seemed to be about 65 years old and really happy with his teaching career. So I asked him one time, Joe, it seems like a lot of people are burned out in education. How did you stay so happy? You're retiring as a happy, fulfilled senior teacher. And he just simply said, he said 2 things. One, he said he never stuck around a job until they didn't like him. And secondly, he changed jobs all of the time. So he said, leave on top and never stay in one place for too long. And it really did stick with me. Now, this is coming from a person who's been in an organization for 25 years. So I've been at Rundle for 25 years. But inside Rundle, I've managed to stay curious. And I taught for 5 or 6 years. I was enrollment officer for a number of years, an assistant principal, and I've been head for about 10 years now. But every time I start to feel myself getting just a little bit stagnant, I seem to pivot, even inside the same organization, and keep things fresh. And I think for me, it just comes back to, being curious. When you get tired of being curious about education, you move into, a hobby, or you move into a new book. We were talking about books earlier. You move into maybe a little bit of travel. And I think you've got to be self-sustaining in that way to avoid being stuck, because I think being stuck is probably difficult to get out from. But I have to be honest, when somebody says, have you been stuck? It just doesn't resonate with me. And I think it's just because I keep moving.
Interesting. Yeah, that involves, I think you have a built-in ability to self-reflect, right? And I think you kind of know what drives you. And I think for a lot of people that we talk with, and even myself, I've had periods in my career where it was a lot of work for me to kind of think through the process. Okay, where am I at? Am I really not moving? Marty and I talk about all the time, trying to project out a vision and goals and where you want to be, and then trying to compare where you actually are at and if you're moving towards those goals. And I think especially we work with a lot of people, like I said before, who are just entering the workforce for the first time, and they're kind of lost in that regard. So our belief is, it's very important to kind of really identify where you want to go and then reflect on actually where you are and if you're making progress on that front.
Yeah.
Our 2 cents worth at least. Marty,
Yeah.
you disagree? Garth?
Well, I think I struggled. I was stuck answering this question actually.
Yeah.
And then I had to do that self-reflection. And in my title at Haverhill College, where I work, is innovation. And I've always been really hesitant, or I've always been really critical of the status quo. I think I get that from my mom and my dad, who are both self-starters, who are both entrepreneurs. My mom was in education for a brief period of time, and then her and my dad started their own company. And I found myself stuck with professional development. How am I going to continue to grow? And Seth Godin, who's an amazing person, he has this ongoing blog. And I came across his blog one day, and it said, if there's no more room at the table, make your own table. And I was like, that always stuck with me. And so a very dear friend of mine and colleague, Justin Medved, he and I started chatting about professional development. These are one day, like a one day thing, a one-off. And so we thought, well, let's just disrupt and see if other people want to have this conversation. And so we created our very own professional development experience, a year long, 4 face-to-faces. We called it Cohort 21. It's in its 13th year now. And I think that is like, we were stuck, and now we have developed a self-sustaining system to keep us unstuck at all times, constantly questioning. We have on average 50 educators every year. And I think it's just a good thing to keep in mind. If there's not enough room at the table, make your own table, and that helps get you unstuck.
I love that. The company I started working for, when Nick and I first started working together, the boss came to my house, the owner of the company, and my husband had to drop him off at the hotel. And I can tell you that 15-minute drive made me more nervous than like when I knew my husband was asking my parents for, like any conversation between them without me. When he got back, I was like, what did you say? He said, well, that the owner asked, like, what do I need to know about Marnie? And Frank said, well, she apparently gets bored at work every 7 years because she's changed jobs every 7 years. So you should give her a challenge. So Jason, when you were talking about finding ways to unstick yourself, and Garth, having a system in place where you find the next challenge or set it up for yourself. Anytime I felt stuck is sort of when, I was bored, or there was a core value clash. But yeah, Nick and I sort of talk around the same line. And along that line, while Roy is stuck, he also has some good guidance for Rebecca along the way. So he and Keely double date, right, with Rebecca and this guy who's fine. He's like,
He's fine. That's it. Nothing wrong with that. Most people are fine. It's not about him. It's about why the fuck you think he deserves you. You deserve someone that makes you feel like you've been struck by fucking lightning. Don't you dare settle for fine.
I feel like that is one of Roy's like prime statements. So do you think in education that students need to hear this? And is there anything that you've done to deliver this to students to help influence them, sports or otherwise?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one. It's kind of my job to do this, outside of the regular classroom timetable. Like global experience is all about, you can't be just fine on this trip. You can't be fine not going on this trip too. So I'm really trying to encourage students to push themselves in a whole bunch of different ways. Cultural competency is where global ed comes from. And then innovation as well. Don't be just fine taking the courses that you're prescribed to take. So we've developed digital micro credentials at our school. Like, just push that a little bit. If you love business, come take our digital micro credential on ESG investing, cryptocurrency, and capital markets. Things that you won't learn in your curriculum that's prescribed. If you love engineering, take our architecture. If you love biology, take our pre-med. So always just trying to push a little bit and get students to think a little bit beyond their comfort zone, a little bit beyond sort of the timetable or their sort of lived experience in the moment. Always trying to push them. And I love that. And I think everyone needs a Roy Kent in their lives for just moments like that. And I love
and
it.
that's
And I know
the
that
diamond dog, having somebody that'll hold you accountable and will push you beyond your comfort zone. Super important. Roy's great.
Yeah, and I know that Roy Kent is Jason's favorite. So Jason, you must have something to say here.
Yeah, Roy's always been my favorite, and this is one of his best moments. I think, don't you settle for fine is so important. Garth and I both work in schools where kids are generally really driven, right? So I come at this maybe in a slightly different way, because more often than not, our kids are achievement oriented and they're pushing themselves. Perfectionism is a real thing in the world generally, and certainly in some of the environments that we work in. And so Garth and I recently had the opportunity to interview the authors of a book called How to Navigate Life. And they talk about 3 mindsets in that book. Okay, they talk about performance mindset, passion mindset, and a purpose mindset. Now, performance is everything, that's perfectionism. That's your straight A's. That's going for it. It's extrinsically motivated, not entirely fulfilling. Passion mindset is more flip, do what you love, go out there and, just chase your passions. But what really strikes me is this purpose mindset. And I think it comes back to this quote from Roy Kent. He is actually saying, like, hey, raise the bar a little bit. Find your why, find your purpose, find your perfect match, and know why it's your perfect match. And I really think that if we anchor ourselves on this sense of purpose, we don't inherently settle for fine because we're intrinsically motivated. It means something to us. And, Marnie, I think you said earlier, but it's like when you have value misalignment, whether it's in your organization or in your leadership or in your relationships, that's where, sometimes settling for fine or worse than fine, which is toxic, would really, really come to play. So I think value alignment, purpose, I think that elevates us to a place of intrinsic motivation and generally being excited about what we do. And then we don't settle for fine. And we fall out of the trappings of perfectionism or performance. I think those are really, really risky places. So I'd hate for my boy Roy Kent to be misinterpreted here. I think he's saying, stick to your values, get what you want, stay intrinsically motivated, and be happy. He probably wouldn't say it like that, but I think be happy is what he's saying here.
And to your point,
what do you say, Jason? Can you just tell us?
Can I swear on your podcast? I'm not sure.
You can. And we're not suitable for children under the age of 18. That's at least the button we click.
We're all good.
Well, I will wrap up with that, is that, you've got to know yourself to understand what your happy is. And I think Bob Berg says that the definition of happiness is living aligned to your core values, which are aligned to your purpose. So happy doesn't necessarily mean fun. It means living toward your purpose. So I think that's very true. Sorry, Nick, I interrupted.
And I just won bingo for my leadership author's bingo card. I think I just so as we know, we referenced early, Dani got the yips. And they're
said it out loud.
I know, and I'm a golfer, and I get the yips all the time, so I can say it. But the Brain Trust, Higgins and Beard and Ted and Nate, they're trying to figure out a solution for this. And probably this episode was filled with great lines. One of our favorite lines: "Never bring an umbrella to a brainstorm."
Any ideas?
Danny needs motivation. We could always just show him his goddamn paycheck.
I mean, that's a tad aggressive, But hey, I shouldn't bring an umbrella to a brainstorm, so I appreciate you getting the ball rolling, Nate.
And you may or may not know this about us, but both Marnie and I, one of our top core values is all about problem solving. And we're always curious on how people approach this. So I'll throw this out to both of you guys. I know that you guys have some pretty daunting problems with, in your school, with your students, in your community. I'm curious if you guys have any go-to strategies when you're trying to make sure that you consider all options. Can you share any of that? Anything new to the table? We'd love to hear some of it around problem solving and never bring an umbrella to the brainstorm.
Garth, maybe I'll start. I've got a couple easy, quick and dirty ones for you. One of the things I've always benefited from is we start a lot of our meetings, particularly when there's going to be something difficult discussed with some core statements or some fundamental understandings of how the meeting is going to run. And the first one is, I always say, listen, my expectation in this meeting is that you're going to be hard on the ideas and easy on each other. We're humans in here, and I always, make a joke that, my wife and kids are off. You can't make fun of them, you can't be hard on them, but you can be hard on everything else, and it's going to be okay because we're all here, in service to solving this problem or moving this innovation forward or working through this change management. So let's get hard on ideas, easy on each other. And the other is, once you've built up a culture of safety in the room, and I think culture of safety is extremely important, and that doesn't happen overnight. It comes with professional capital and a lot of hard work to get there, is having other structures in place that make sharing our opinions fast and easy. And so, often we've got this thing, and I think a lot of people do this, but it's a fist to 5, and we'll just do it as a leadership team. There could be 10 people at the table, or it could be 2. And it's just a quick gauge. A fist is no way, no how I'm going to fight it. Or a 5 is I'm happy to lead it. And then you can kind of work through what 1 to 4 would be in the context of your organization. And so you ask your team fist to 5, and you can see pretty quickly where people land, and then you can start to work through it. And we have a rule that if somebody's a fist at the table, then we're not going forward with it. It's just that simple, because there's probably a good reason for it. So I think, really stating your intentions, having good norms for your meetings is a great way to avoid, bringing an umbrella to a brainstorm. Garth, but I'm dying to know, you're the innovator and brainstormer of the country. So what do you do over there? What's the magic at Havergal and cohort, whatever you're working on, 26?
Yeah, so I think I read this question. Maybe I was in like a different mood or just like headspace when I read this question, because I read it as like one of the best things you can do is like check in with yourself, like to make sure that you aren't coming to a challenge with bias already built in of how you're going to solve it.
Yeah.
So we do a couple things at Havergal. I think our principal's a genius for this. She had us all do a leadership inventory, like it's called MVS. What's your strengths? What's your motivation? Mm-hmm. Really simple in terms of the outputs. Like, I understand where I go in conflict. I understand where my team goes in conflict. We actually have an app on our phones. I can look up my team, and it just provides a little bit of space, a little bit of like, hey, before I go in to talk about A, B, or C, I'm just going to remind myself, what do I need to be aware of myself and who's in the room with me? Understanding, as I said earlier, the complexities that we are all human, So I think like really be aware of your own bias. Like Jason said, how do you involve others? How do you like bring others in for this? But I would also say our school is like 130 years old, and we have done, in my 9 years there, we've done so much, and schools are innovating all over the place. What can we learn from outside of the education sector? What can we learn about the history of our school? Have we tried this solution before? Did it work? Did it not? Have we had this challenge before? How was it overcome? So I think going into some storytelling, I think, is really important. So yeah, I would say start with yourself, and then what you know of your team, and then go into like a little bit of storytelling, and then all those things that Jason said too, because I think Jason is a master at faculty culture and accessing culture specifically or especially in challenging times. Yeah.
And I think I'll just jump in quickly, because I think brainstorming has its time and place. But I think it's one of the least effective strategies for getting good ideas on the table, because it is too divergent. Like if you're trying to be very divergent, you're not focused. A brainstorming maybe is a place for it, but like instead, working on something that they've worked on for a long time at IDEO, and Tim Brown talks about plussing. How do we improve this idea or the whatever we're working on, as opposed to this random out there abstract brainstorming. However, in the case of Ted Lasso and the trick play and all the rest, of course, some incredible creativity was required, and probably brainstorming was the best way to get to it, given that Ted knew virtually nothing about football or soccer to start with.
So it's interesting that you mentioned. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, get into IDEO. Like, design thinking has some great protocols and mindset, like sort of to set your mindset. I think systems thinking as well, like ladder of inference. These are the types of tools that as leaders we should have in our toolkit, especially when dealing with challenging situations, but ensuring that we practice them before challenging situations come up.
Oh, yeah, that's not the time to test out the new theory.
Yeah, like I like parenting is, you learn so much about yourself when you're parent. When my oldest was quite young, we'd say, okay, like, you seem a little upset or activated, like, take a deep breath. And we only ever did it when he was activated. We only ever did it when it was required. We didn't practice it. He didn't get the joy of what it means to just like take a deep breath and like really focus and concentrate your energies, to equalize yourself. So I would say practice these as much as you can before they're required.
So it's interesting that you mentioned IDEO, because Nick and I had the opportunity to go participate in 2 different military organization brainstorming activities with the founders of Aiken, who came from IDEO. And they did I wish I wonder activity that we've talked about certainly on LinkedIn. And it was really interesting because they had the plus. So the folks in the room, for sure, you weren't allowed to just say, I agree. You had to +1 that and add something new to it. And it was a great initial, Jason, to your point. It wasn't when we were down to one idea that we needed to grow. It was, we need the initial idea. And the fun part of it was, and it happened, we were in Mississippi and we were in Virginia, right? So we were not in the same places, but the same thing happened, 2 different problems, 2 different rooms, tons of different people, and they would brainstorm all the ideas, and then they would get to a lull, and the one facilitator, would you feel it? We're in it, right? What next? And then all of a sudden, all this innovation. So I think to get to innovation is what they were saying. So it was a really interesting. Nick, do you have any other follow-ups from that? That was just an interesting lesson to watch.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and I think to the point Garth was making, the facilitator, the whole point was you got to practice this, right? You're not just going to go at it on a whim and, hey, you're all of a sudden this wonderful design thinker, right? It takes practice, and that's what we witnessed, which was kind of cool.
They had 30 military leaders from foreign countries that the U.S. partners with, and they started with a very simplistic, how do you get a cat out of a tree? Right. So these were 30 military leaders from foreign countries, and we watched for 20 minutes while they talked about getting a cat out of a tree. Yes, of course, their first option was to shoot it out of the tree because they're military leaders. So I'll just throw that out there. Right.
And they're second and they're last. That was a pretty popular one. Yeah,
they were big on that one.
Was how to kill it.
But they did practice with that, and then they were able to do a real life one. So I think that just proves the point that Garth was saying, that Nick brought up. So I think, if nothing else, we see Ted Lasso and the lessons in that show everywhere in our world. It has clearly made an impact on us. It has clearly brought folks together, right? That's how you all ended up with Lassoing Leadership podcast. So we want to give you a chance to tell folks about your podcast, the motivation behind doing it, other than just you love Ted Lasso, and what do you want your audience to get out of your podcast? Who should listen to you?
You want to start, Garth?
Sure. Thanks, Jason. So why are we doing this? Selfishly, it's to spend more time with Jason, because he is a fantastic leader, well respected in our community. He's a doctorate in leadership, written a book, the whole bit. So I appreciate the time I spend with him and learn from him. I think our podcast is short. It's about 15 to 20 minutes long in general. And for me, it serves two purposes. One is it gives Jason and I sequestered time to reflect on our own leadership. Like, we're just subjecting other people to it. Like, whoever chooses to listen is like subjected to it. But
you're fishbowling the leadership, so which you can learn a lot from watching that, right?
Yeah. It reminds us that leadership is an ongoing practice, and we want to share that with other people, because leadership can be lonely, right? And so here are two leaders in very well respected independent schools who are saying we don't have the answers. Like, we struggle with this too, right? We're still practicing, and I think it's really important. And so, it's that idea that we sequester time to reflect on our own practice. I think it's really important. And then it just brings me so much joy. I love talking about positive things. And we did struggle a little bit with, two white males talking about a white male main character lead in the show. But I think our world needs a little bit more joy. And as a white male, we need more positive role models who we can see ourselves in, leading in a kinder, more compassionate way. Jason, what about you?
Well, Garth, that's why I love you. Actually, and I like spending time with Garth. So that was first one, selfishly. Secondly, same as Garth said, we do want to reflect on our own leadership and hopefully teach a thing or two along the lines. But I think circling back to something we talked about earlier is about being stuck. And I said this to Garth about, maybe a month into creating our podcast, is I'm happiest when I'm creating. And so this is an opportunity to create something new and share this conversation around a topic that I really enjoy, and I know Garth does as well, and we've got a lot of listeners who do as well. So, and I really think when I was younger, somebody asked me what I want to do for my job. This was before going to university, and I said, I just want to be surrounded by interesting people and have conversations with them. And so I'm kind of living my dream right here, because we get to bring in interesting people and have interesting conversations about topics that we both enjoy. So yeah, I like how you put that, Garth. We were just, really subjecting others to our conversations about leadership and fulfilling my life's purpose on
As I've
Spotify.
taken another page of notes, I'm like, I'm going to invite people to a podcast so I can learn.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So just sticking on the Ted Lasso theme. So everybody, the rumor is season 4 is happening, and I don't think we can get by without asking you what do you, real quick, where do you think it's going to go? Where do you think it's going to go? What's going to happen in season 4? They're going to be in Richmond. They're going to be somewhere else. Who's going to be back? Any thoughts?
Here's my first thought, and I'll make it quicker. I think Roy Kent is going to try to be like Ted Lasso, and I think it's going to fail terribly. I think if Nate returns, he's going to try to right the ship by, saying, Roy, hey, listen, I followed a paradigm that didn't work for me, and look how it turned out. Or I tried to follow a leader that wasn't authentic to me. How did it turn out? And then we're going to see Roy shift all the way back to his core, and we're going to see, between Popovich and Phil Jackson come out of him, and we're gonna wrap up on that. And I think that's a Roy Kent arc. That's all I really care about. They should call the show Roy Kent, not Ted Lasso.
Season 4 is Roy Kent.
We would all watch Roy Kent. Yeah, that's totally fair. Garth?
So I don't know any of the other characters' names. I don't know anything about them, but that's what's happening with Roy Kent. That's all that matters. Garth, what do you think?
I struggled with this question. I was going down like, who's married, who's not. I really want Rebecca to marry that pilot from Amsterdam.
Yeah,
Rebecca's my fave. So I was wishing happiness for all the characters. But then I landed on this. I think that season 4 will still deliver messages that we need to hear. A relatively counterculture message of joy, patience, curiosity, kindness, acceptance, like that there's a bigger picture out there rather than wins and losses, rather than zero-sum thinking. So how they do that is anyone's guess.
So I've mentioned this to Nick. I'm going to say it out and we're going to put it in the universe. You know how they put Easter eggs in there all the time? Yeah. We want Easter eggs of like walking in and having our book on one of their bookshelves, or they listen to one of our podcasts. And wouldn't it be hilarious if like Lucy Broadbent's book was up there, if he was cooking out of the Ted Lasso cookbook, if our podcasts were on a playlist, just something I'm just going to throw that out there.
That'd be
I love it.
Well, rule number 11 in our book is manifested. You know, we talked about rule number 1. Rule number 11 is manifested. So I will never discount anything Marnie says because it always needs to happen.
Yeah.
So, all right, we have one final question for each of you.
Yeah.
We mentioned trick plays earlier. If a trick play was named after you, what would it be? So what's the Garth Nichols? What's the Jason Rogers trick play, aka life hack? Who wants to go first on that one?
I'll go first. I coach
Yeah.
our varsity basketball team, and we actually have a trick play. And suitably enough for the title of this episode, our trick play is called Lost Dog.
Oh,
So
that's perfect.
yeah.
Is it just somebody wandering down the court that gets a breakaway? Or?
So check this out. We line up in certain positions, but then our captain is on the floor, or who's ever on the floor as the, captaining this play. They'll pretend that everyone is out of position, and they'll start yelling and causing confusion on the floor. And you get a 5 count to put the ball in. So 1, 2, 3, and for those first 3 seconds, people are just looking around, boom, and then the last second, we just break into this like very specific formation. Like it's great. Our success rate is about 75%.
That's not bad.
Yeah, it reminds me, like my principal told me that at one point in time in my role, 75% of your work should fail. So I think the Lost Dog is actually a little bit better. So I think a trick play named after me would involve definitely some fun, probably a little bit of chaos, some quick action, a high level of trust, and it might be a little bit of high risk, high reward.
Well, we're going to trust that none of your rivals actually are listening to this podcast because your probability of success is going to go way down, Garth, on the Lost Dog.
Perhaps.
Jason, how about you?
Ironically, we'll end up playing Havergal later this year, and I'll talk to my coach a little bit.
Yes, you will.
Following this podcast, so thanks for that, Garth. We got beat by like 50 last time, so I'm not sure these 2 points are going to count. I would. I've been thinking about this one. I would go with just simply 168. And the reason I thought of 168, play 168, its number, it comes from a book by Laura Vanderkam, 168 Hours, You Have More Time Than You Think. And it comes back to time management. Honestly, between that and the Dan Pink book called When, I think time management is absolutely key for, staying balanced, being effective, being productive. And those 2 books, really did change the game for me, understanding how to best use our time. That's the only thing we really, it's the limitation. So, 168, you got more time than you think. And Laura Vanderkam and Dan Pink definitely helped me with that. And I'd encourage like all leaders or all people who, I guess all people in general to really think about their time strategically. And I think all of us be a lot better off. So that's the trick play. Just be efficient with your time.
Love it.
Nice. Well, we're going to try to be efficient with your time and let you go. So Jason and Garth, we honestly cannot thank you enough for taking the time to chat with us today. Did you want to tell anybody where they can find your podcast or anything else where they can find you guys?
Yeah, you can find us on Apple or Spotify. Just look up Lassoing Leadership, and we're pretty much a one-trick pony. We don't have any books. We don't have, any blogs, just the podcast. So, and you can find us both on LinkedIn pretty easily. But Lassoing Leadership, thanks for listening. And thanks for having us as guests. This was a lot of fun.
I love these questions. I love these questions. Thank you both so much. And I will do actually a plug for your work because your masterclass, I've been working my way through it. The community you're building, the questions you're asking, really valuable stuff. So thanks for this generous invitation. Thanks for the masterclass as well. And thanks for being on our podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. This is a great community.
Yeah.
All right. We appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please like, comment, and share. And we'll see you next time as we review the next episode, which I think is Lavender. If I'm not mistaken.
Lavender, yes.
So
that's a good
again, both you guys, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.
Thank you.